Good evening. I am Rachel Young-Fields. I'm the president and chair of the SBF Board of Directors. On behalf of my fellow board members and the SBF staff, welcome to the SBF Fall Special event. It's presented tonight by E. Shaver Bookseller, who's donating 20% of the book sales this evening to the festival. So thank you to E. Shaver for making tonight's event possible. I'd also like to welcome those participating via our live stream. Virtually, this program's going out, so thank you so much for being with us. We are so very excited to be bringing you tonight an opportunity to engage with #1 New York Times best-selling author Chris Bohjalian, outside of our annual flagship 4-day festival in February, which, by the way, is shaping up to be an incredible weekend, and it's just 105 days away, if you're counting, which we are. We've just announced the headliners for the festival, but in case you missed it, the opening address will be given by Jack Carr, former Navy SEAL and author of The Terminal List, which was made into an Amazon Prime series. We get some nods with Chris Pratt. The keynote address will be given by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, the #1 New York Times best-selling authors, acclaimed for having written not one, but 2 of the 100 greatest thrillers ever written, according to an NPR poll. And the closing address will be given by David Moranis, a Pulitzer Prize winner and author of Path Lit by Lightning, The Life of Jim Thorpe. Each Tuesday, we are also releasing the names of 5 additional authors that will present on Festival Saturday, which, as always, will be free and open to the public. So be sure to sign up for our newsletter or follow us on social media or both so you can go ahead and get your reading list together for President's Day weekend. I'd like to thank tonight the Reverend Dr. Ben Gaston and Trinity United Methodist Church for letting us use this space. I'd also like to thank our SBF Volunteer Committee, who, in addition to all of their amazing efforts throughout the year to recruit and manage our big volunteer base, are themselves the volunteers tonight. So thank you to the Volunteer Committee. I'd also like to thank the SBF sponsors for their commitment to the festival. Year after year, we are supported by individuals and businesses who believe in our mission to celebrate the written word and promote reading, writing, and civil conversation. We say it often, but we really mean it. We could not do it without you, so thank you very much. Yeah. All right, so we'd like to remind you to turn off your cell phones if you haven't already. No flash photography tonight. For the question and answer portion, we ask you to raise your hand and one of our volunteers will bring a microphone around to you to ask a question. Even if you think you project really well, please wait for a microphone because we are recording this event and live streaming, so we want to make sure to capture your question. Please limit yourself to 1 question. And please don't be the person that asks a question that spoils the book for everyone else. And also, don't tell us a story. Immediately following the discussion, Chris will be signing books purchased here this evening, and books will be available for purchase down here by E. Shaver, and then he will be personalizing them over here at a table. But there are pre-signed books. All of Mr. Bohjalian's books are available for purchase if you have dinner reservations or you don't want to wait in line. So you can still get a signed book from E. Shaver over here at the table. Finally, I'd like to raise a point of personal privilege and wish my husband, Sean, a happy birthday. I'm going to give you all a gift, and I'm not going to ask you to sing. All right, now it is my pleasure to turn it over to SBF board member, Deep Center Director of Youth Programs, and author Ariel Felton, who will introduce Chris and moderate this evening's discussion. So please welcome Ariel Felton.
Thank you, Rachel. And welcome, everyone. I am very excited to have the opportunity to introduce and ask a few questions for tonight's guest. So, Chris Bohjalian is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 24 books, which means I can't even list them all in the short time that I have for this introduction, but I will try to give his career justice. Chris's earliest novels include Water Witches in 1995 and Midwives in 1997, the latter of which was an Oprah's Book Club selection and Publishers Weekly Best Book of the Year. In these two groundbreaking works, Chris revealed his penchant for writing gripping fiction that explores contemporary social issues, shedding light on important moments in history through the lives of ordinary characters. In the span of 3 decades, Chris has published a novel almost every 2 years. His most popular books include The Guest Room, The Sandcastle Girls, and The Double Bind. He's the type of novelist whose words easily translate to the big screen. His novels Secrets of Eden, Midwives, and Past the Bleachers were all made into movies. He moves effortlessly from the big screen to the small screen. His 2018 novel, The Flight Attendant, is now an HBO Max TV series starring Kaylee Cuoco, and season 2 just landed this past April if you have not seen it. The story opens in a fabulous hotel suite overseas, where Cassandra Bowden awoke to find herself in bed with a dead man. The book debuted as a New York Times, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Publishers Weekly, and National IndieBound bestseller. Chris is also a playwright and screenwriter. Where he finds the time, I do not know. He adapted his novel Midwives for a play, which premiered January 2020 at the George Street Playhouse, and was directed by David Saint. Broadway World called the play absolutely unforgettable. Today, he's here to talk about his newest novel, The Lioness. It is a riveting historical thriller in which a luxurious African safari turns deadly for a Hollywood star and her entourage. Jodi Picoult said, "The Lioness feels like the best possible combination of Hemingway and Agatha Christie. A gorgeously written story about the landscape and risk of Africa, whose edge-of-your-seat plot makes it impossible to put down. Bohjalian just gets better and better." Please join me in welcoming Chris to the stage.
Thank you, Ariel, for that introduction. Before I thank everyone, before I wish Sean a happy birthday. I want to talk for a moment about my voice. Some of you have heard me before, most recently, in this wonderful city in 2016 for the Savannah Book Festival, and you're thinking, oh, the poor guy, he has laryngitis, I don't. This is my new voice, thank you, COVID. But do not fret. I got COVID in March of 2020, and this is a weird, long-haul side effect. But I'm fine. I've got a wonderful voice therapist in New York City. She's a former Israeli Forces Special Commando, so she is really focused. And we started working together last October. And I remember after our first day together, we worked about 8 hours. She said to me, "Chris Bohjalian, I have watched so much video of you. I watched video of you before you lose voice, after you lose voice. And you say this is somatic reaction to grief. Well, Chris Bohjalian, you do not know grief. I did my homework on you. When you were the little boy playing the Little League Baseball in Connecticut in 1973, I watched my beloved fiancé go into battle where he is killed. And what did I do? I went into battle right behind him. No, you do not know grief. Also, get over yourself. You are very big ham, even when your voice is total bowel movement. All Grandpa Simpson all the time. I'm going to listen to you because you have interesting things to say. Now, one of the weird quirks of this long-haul disorder is that when I mimic other voices, I have greater voice clarity. So I love to mimic her. And she knows I do this. And once she heard me do it, and she said, Chris Bohjalian, you think I sound like that? You are a good writer, but you are one crappy mimic. What, you think I sound like Russian hooker? So, do not fret, I'm fine. Now, first of all, I want to thank Ariel so much for doing this. Ariel is a spectacular journalist. It was so much fun today to be going through the New York Times, and there's Ariel, writing all about the 36, if you have 36 hours in Savannah, what you need to do. And today I was able to do 2 of the things. So I need to cancel my plane tomorrow to Arizona to do the rest. I also want to thank everyone at eShaver Books. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Annie, for celebrating what words and reading in books can mean to the soul. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone with the Savannah Book Festival. Sean, thank you for loaning us Rachel on your birthday. This is a great book city, and it is such a privilege for me to be back with all of you. And with that, I will sit down, and we're off and running.
Thanks, Chris. That was really sweet of you. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to start at the beginning and ask what first inspired the story of The Lioness?
The Lioness was inspired in August of 2019. I was in New York City because we were workshopping my adaptation of Midwives, and Monday is the Equity Union Day off. So I went to see a movie, a matinee. And we all know that feeling. When you emerge from a matinee because you were in the dark of the cinema, and now you're emerging and it's daylight. Moreover, this is August in New York City. So I went from the air-conditioned chill of a movie theater into the blistering, scorching August humidity of New York City. And I thought to myself, my gosh, I love movies. Why have I never written a Hollywood novel? And so I decided I would. But I knew even in 2019 that the big screen experience was changing. I was the only human being in that matinee. And this was not the first time either I was alone in a movie theater or my wife and I were alone in movie theaters. Because going back to 2014, the big screen experience was changing. Changes that became even more manifest during the pandemic. Now, thankfully, we still have big screen movies and a reason to go to theaters. I mean, obviously, Top Gun Maverick, anything with Chris Pratt, is going to crush it at the big screen box office. But there's still a change. And so I knew this novel was going to be historical fiction. It was going to be set in one of Hollywood's golden ages. And it dawned on me, I'd never set a movie in my childhood, the 1960s or the 1970s. And so I thought, that's where I want to go. Now, I'm of an age where people just a little bit older than me, the first movie they ever saw was very likely Mary Poppins. Dick Van Dyke, Julie Andrews, animated dancing penguins. Not me. The first movie I ever saw, because my parents either A, had no judgment, or B, wanted me to become a novelist who loved dread. First movie I ever saw, Bonnie and Clyde.
Wow.
Second movie was Goodbye Columbus. There's a reason I write the books that I do. So I decided I'm going to set a book in the 1960s, Hollywood, and where can I put these movers and shakers from Tinseltown that will put them in jeopardy? And when I thought of all the historical events and all of the Cold War proxy wars going on, I decided on East Africa. And I was off and running.
Nice, nice. So, in the acknowledgments of the Lioness, you mentioned that you went to the Serengeti to research this book a few months before COVID shut the planet down. So, I don't know about the rest of you, but during COVID, I maybe baked some bread, I binge watched a lot of Netflix. I did not write a book. So, I would like to know, what is that like, working on a book in the middle of a pandemic that no one knows when the end is coming?
I'm going to be brutally honest with you. This book, and this is hyperbole, but not by as much as you think, saved my life. Because here's what's going on. It's March of 2020, and 1 minute I can talk, and then I can't. Literally, I am mute. The voice is just gone, and no one knows why. My wife and my daughter's careers, my wife is a fine art photographer. The biggest show she's had in 4 years is gone. My daughter is a young actor whose career is just taking off. She has a pilot. She's booked through all of 2020, and she was booked through most of 2019. And it all goes away. I've got a book coming out March 17th called The Red Lotus about, wait for it, a world on the cusp of a pandemic. And all I've got to stay sane and to keep me grounded for my wife and my daughter is this novel. So I had a great time writing it because I'm quarantining in Vermont, which is a great place to quarantine. My gosh, I live at the edge of a cliff in the middle of the woods. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful. And I've got this new dog. We've just gotten this rescue from Texas, and my life's pretty good on the surface. But I look at my wife and I look at my daughter and I look at the world, and it's unraveling. And so if you look at the dedication for the Lioness, it basically says, for my pod, literal and metaphoric, in 2020 and the first half of 2021, known also as the year that Satan spawned, when I was hanging on by my fingernails, you gave me your hand. So I was really grateful that in September of 2019, the safari company called us and said, we know you're booked to join us in May of 2020. There's been a cancellation. Do you think you and your wife feel like going in October, like in 5 weeks? And my wife and I looked at each other and said, heck yeah. So we go on the safari in October of 2019, and it is fantastic. I know some of you in the audience have been on safaris. It's life-changing. It's wonderful. Because the thing about certainly Tanzania is that the new political leaders in 1963 and 1964 understood something that so many other governments around the world didn't then and don't now understand, and this is this. In their case, the Serengeti was what John Evans called the last great place on earth. And it had to be preserved. It had to be preserved for the wildlife and the ecosystem, and it had to be preserved for the human beings of this new nation because of something that they didn't have a word for yet, but we know now. Ecotourism. For getting people like Victoria and Chris to venture to Tanzania from Vermont to see elephants and leopards in a habitat that could have been destroyed but wasn't because of this new government in the early 1960s that had it all figured out.
Well, I know I'm really glad that you were able to write this book, even in the middle of a pandemic, because it is so great. It is so thrilling. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about your safari. There's a few scenes in the book where the characters are talking about their favorite animal experiences that they've seen, whether it's elephants, giraffes. I think it was Carmen who said warthogs were her favorite.
Yeah. They're adorable.
What were some of your favorite sights on the safari?
Everything the animals do in the lioness, other than eating human beings, which they do, are things that I witnessed on the safari. One of the great gifts of going in October is that my wife and I saw one of the things I really wanted to see. The migration of the wildebeest and the zebras, when tens of thousands line up at the northern side of the Mara River and get the courage to race across it to get to the grazing lands south of the Mara. And if we'd gone in May, we wouldn't have seen that. But we did. We saw the frenetic crossing, and it is one of those circle of life moments because we did see at least 2 wildebeest pulled under by crocodiles. About 40 feet from our Land Rover, we saw a lioness jump from the tall grass and bring down a wildebeest. We saw those moments when a mother elephant, with something like pride, pushes her offspring in front of the human being's cameras. We saw the lioness with her 4 cubs, the leopard with her cub. And those moments are just so lovely. But of course, I also loved the lone ostrich. I loved talking to the guides about the flora, because the flora is gorgeous. It's really beautiful. And there are so many trees that will friggin' kill you or blind you if you don't know what you're doing. And when I would be chatting with our rangers or the guides for the first 2 or 3 days, they understood I was a novelist, but they still thought I was the most macabre human being they'd ever met, because I was constantly asking them about all the ways there are to die in the Serengeti. And as we got to know each other, they were really clear. A safari is 100% safe if you listen to your guides. If you aren't trying to win a Darwin Award, you'll be fine. But, one of our guides was in his 70s, and he had seen plenty of human beings who were Darwin Award finalists. They had to go to the mess tent, even after dark, when you were never supposed to leave your tent, because, they were thinking Hemingway and they wanted some whiskey. It was only the next morning that the ranger would have to show them the lion's footprints near their footprints at the bar tent.
That is terrifying. That is very scary. So another question from the acknowledgments that you just mentioned, I was wondering, is there any interesting way to die in the Serengeti that didn't make it into the book? Because there's a lot of interesting deaths, but I'm wondering if there's any way that you learned about in your research that didn't make it in the book that you can share with us.
Yes, I had no trees blind any of the people on the entourage. And that isn't because the trees didn't scare me or the trees won't blind you, but because to a certain degree I anthropomorphosed some of the animals. I mean, not literally, but I loved the animals as characters. And so I focused more on the ways that snakes, leopards, hyenas, lions will kill you. Now, I have no one gored. There are no human beings gored in this book by a rhinoceros or a buffalo. I could have done that.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I loved what Geordie's book club said about this book, and they said, wow, it's Evelyn Hugo meets Jurassic Park.
There's so much history in this book, so much that I found myself looking up the characters to make sure that this was like truly fiction. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the research, the experts that you spoke to, and if there was anything, shocking in the historical research that you had to do to really pull the lioness together.
Yeah, the research. And we've talked a lot about the safari research, but a lot of the book is set in Hollywood in the 1960s. Hollywood in the 1960s, it was a great, fascinating, interesting, horrible place. And I really enjoyed my research into Hollywood. We talk a lot right now about the toxicity of the social networks. And make no mistake, I'm on Twitter, so I know what a dumpster fire Twitter is. But before we had Twitter, we had Hollywood fan magazines. And, we didn't call them trolls, but, the Hollywood magazines were just horrifying. The things they would say, the innuendo, the way they knew exactly how to be snarky. And I was fascinated reading those magazines. And I was fascinated talking to people who came of age in the 1960s and the 1970s in Hollywood. The agents, the managers. I'm not going to say I talked to a lot of actors who came of age then because I didn't. But, you get the sense of just from the historical record how they were either manipulated, abused, or tried to play the studio system and the magazine system. Here is the wildest thing in the book that's real. The CIA's involvement with LSD in the 1950s and the 1960s. There's a character in the book who is thrown out of a New York City hotel window or jumps from a hotel window. We still don't know why, but we do know this. He worked for the CIA, and the CIA was dosing him with LSD to see if they could use LSD for mind control. And that, of course, figures in The Lioness. And the more I read about the CIA and LSD, the more I was utterly fascinated. When we talk about the CIA in the 1960s, we think of other stuff they did. For example, almost assassinating a president of Congo. We don't think of them dosing their own with LSD.
Wow, I didn't realize that was real.
That was real.
Wow. So you have a host of characters in the book. In each chapter, if you haven't read it, goes kind of back and forth in point of view from these characters. You have Hollywood starlets, you have African porters and guides. I'm wondering, as a writer, you're occupying quite a few identities that are different from your own. Who in the book was the hardest to capture?
The hardest for me to capture, and I'm not going to reveal who this character is.
Okay, I'll know.
But it's the one character with a malevolent secret who might have compromised the safety of the safari. And the reason for that is because I have a lot of evil characters in my book. I have a lot of morally compromised characters in my books. The hardest for me to write are the characters who are dirtbags. Because I understand, as Hannah Arendt has taught us, that evil is evil and evil is often banal. And it's really hard for me to do evil characters justice.
I do know who that is. I was telling you backstage that you killed my favorite character in the book, but I've forgiven him. Without spoiling the ending, of course, could you talk about how a writer decides in a book like this who's making it out alive and who's not? I'm sure you have favorite characters, so how do you decide?
There's a great expression that, I don't remember who said it, but as a writer, you need to kill your darlings. And the person who said it didn't mean characters, meant editing, meant often you need to kill passages that you like a lot because they don't propel the story forward. They don't illuminate character. They're just showboating. So they have to go. For me, I literally kill my darlings. And I've done it a lot. Skeletons at the feast, the flight attendant, the guest room, the sandcastle girls, the light in the ruins, the red lotus, and yes, the lioness. I am really comfortable killing the characters I love. And the reason for that is because I love books that break my heart. I would have killed Harry Potter at the end of book 7. Which is probably why J.K. Rowling sells one quantity of books and I sell a different quantity of books. I mean, I love when I finish a book and I'm all verklempt because that man, that woman, that character I really liked did something heroic and is gone. And so in The Lioness, there are 11 characters, and a lot of them don't make it out of the safari alive. And in 4 of the cases, they die because they are doing something unbelievably heroic that they never thought they could do. Some of the characters die for other reasons. But the ones that break my heart are the darlings.
That's very true. There are some very heroic characters in this book. So I read in one of your interviews this quote: "As much as I love writing the verb, I probably love writing the noun even more. I doubt anyone becomes a serious novelist who doesn't love reading." Could you talk about some of the authors and books that helped you or inspired you while you were writing The Lioness?
No, because I can't recall what I was reading in the year 2020. Because, I read like 4,
That's fair.
but I will tell you some of the books that I've read recently that I just loved. Among the books that I would definitely recommend going to eShaver and picking up Emily St. John Mandel's Sea of Tranquility, Anthony Mara's Mercury Pictures Presents. And when we're talking about Hollywood, the thing I love about Mercury Pictures Presents is it's Italy and Hollywood in the 1930s and the 1940s, and the world's crappiest movie studio in the 1940s, but some of the decisions that some of the people make to do the right thing. If you haven't read it and you want to have your heart broken, read Night Crawling. I'm currently reading Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger, which so far is not going to leave me weeping the way The Road did, which is a good thing. It's a great book. So are some of the ones off the top of my head. Now, I read a lot of galleys, books that are coming out in the future. Some of the galleys I've read in the last couple of weeks that I loved a lot. Coming out in the spring, you'll see Patty Callahan Henry's The Secret Book of Flora Lee. It's all about children in 1940 who are sent to the British countryside in the midst of the Blitz. Christopher Boland's The Lost Americans. If you like The Flight Attendant or The Red Lotus, you'll love The Lost Americans because it's about a woman in New York City whose brother works for a defense contractor in Cairo who seems to be a suicide, but she knows her brother, and she doesn't believe this. So she goes to Cairo to investigate it. Off the top of my head, those are some. Now, I've also got a huge stack of books about the Civil War and articles about Richmond in 2020. Because the book I'm writing right now, which you won't see till 2025, moves back and forth in time between the Shenandoah Valley in 1864 and Richmond in July, August, and September of 2020.
Thank you. Thanks. So, as I said in my introduction, you have been writing novels for a while. You've got a lot of star reviews, a lot of bestsellers. There's readers here, but there's probably some writers here too, like myself. What is the biggest lesson you've learned in your writing career over the past years?
I have never been asked that question.
Really?
Never.
Thank you.
Your questions are there's a reason why Ariel is such a spectacular journalist.
I'm nosy.
These questions are all great, but no, I've never been asked that. Two of the things I do now that I didn't do 10 years ago, but make me a better writer, is I begin every day by looking at the dictionary. And it's not an online dictionary. It's one of those dictionaries that you find in libraries that weighs 15 pounds. And I pick out 2 or 3 words I don't think I've ever used before. And after 24 books, sometimes I'm surprised and I discover I have. But words like noctivagant, niveus, and I try to use them that day when I'm writing, because what we do as novelists is use words. And then I do this. I watch 2 or 3 movie or TV series trailers, because those beautifully produced 2 and 3 minute long commercials for movies are designed to instantly elicit an emotion. And they instantly catapult me into a particular scene I'm trying to write emotionally. Now, sometimes it has nothing to do with the subject matter of the book I'm writing. So, for example, when I was writing a book called The Sleepwalker, I was watching the movie trailer for Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, because it was such an interesting catapult into the subconscious. The next book you will see from me is called The Princess of Las Vegas, about a Princess Diana tribute show actor in Las Vegas. So I was always watching either Spencer with Kristen Stewart, The Crown with Emma Corwin, or Diana with Naomi Watts. just these trailers to remember what it's like to feel Diana. Or I would be watching, and there's so many really bad Las Vegas movies from the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Do you have a favorite bad movie that you like to watch?
I do. But I don't want to, I try not to throw bad things under the bus because I'm just one opinion. I will tell you that my favorite Las Vegas stuff is Hacks. I love the HBO Max series with Gene Smart, Hacks. And I love it for a lot of reasons. But I love season 1, which is set in Vegas. Also, I can watch YouTube videos of casinos being demolished for hours.
Speaking of television and movies, quite a few of your books have been made into, TVs and movies for the big and small screen. Could you talk a little bit about the process of watching your words become visuals for the screen, and how much does a writer get to have a part in that, have a say?
Sure. Okay, first of all, I do want to tell you that The Lioness is already in development for a TV series, and I love the studio and the team behind it. It's a studio and the team that gave us some of my favorite shows like Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jackets is right up my alley. Any show where cannibalism is the least horrible thing that happens is right up my alley. Pose, Vikings. It's just one, a discovery of witches. And I'm so excited they're making The Lioness. My involvement in the 3 movies and the TV series that have been made for my books was critical if you want to see the guy scarfing down coffee and bagels at craft services. That was my contribution. Drinking coffee and eating bagels. All props to the flight attendant goes to Kaylee Cuoco, Steve Yockey, Greg Berlanti, Sarah Schechter, and the cast and crew. Midwives, it's all Craig Anderson and Sissy Spacek and Allison Pill, and I could say the same about the other projects. Now, some projects, if they get made, I will be more involved with than others. I'm one of the writers on Skeletons at the Feast. We've written 4 hours in a show Bible, but it hasn't gotten a green light. If the guest room ever gets made, along with, Oscar winner Alex Denelaris and Pulitzer Prize winner Martina Mayak, I'm a writer. So it varies. If The Lioness gets made, I am an executive producer. But again, how much of the writing I do remains to be seen, because there are better writers than me who do this all the time. I have discovered I'm not just a one-trick pony novelist. But we'll see how involved I am in subsequent projects.
Yeah, well, someone has to drink the coffee and eat the bagels. That's what they're there for.
And I'm good at that.
So I know you brought a few props over here with you. We were talking a little bit about your writing career, and I believe you have a Cosmopolitan article that you've written, your first novel, and then I've forgotten what's in the red notebook, but I'm hoping you could share these stories with us.
I can. I brought 3 props. A writer's journey, if you will. First of all, this is the oldest short story in existence I ever wrote. When my father died and I was cleaning out his apartment, I discovered a sweater box under his bed, and in it were all of these short stories I wrote in the 4th or 5th grade that my mother saved and then my father saved. And I bring this for 2 reasons. First of all, my cursive was fantastic. Which explains why I was always the coolest kid in 4th grade. Because if you want to be the alpha male among 9-year-olds, have the good penmanship. But no, actually, I brought it because I was fascinated by how much of my sensibility as a novelist was in stone as a 9-year-old. This is the last sentence of the oldest short story in existence I ever wrote. It could have appeared in a lot of my books, and certainly in The Lioness. This is the last sentence. The dripping stopped, and the vultures had their meal. Part 2 of the writer's journey. When I graduated from college, I went right to work at an ad agency. Didn't get an MFA in writing. Wrote short stories from 5 to 7 a.m. every day before work. And I sent them relentlessly to Harper's, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, where I was summarily and consistently rejected. When I got rejection slip number 250, I thought to myself, plan A not working. Time to try plan B. Now at the time, Cosmopolitan was publishing a lot of fiction. So I rounded up 6 months' worth of Cosmopolitans and read them thoroughly to try to understand what constituted a cosmopolitan short story. And then I wrote one. It's about a female supermodel who lives in a spectacular loft in Lower Manhattan, but her marriage is a little bit dicey. So one weekend, she goes out to her equally cool beach house on Fire Island, the Atlantic Ocean, to see if her marriage can be saved, but instead spends the entire time playing scantily clad beach volleyball. Cosmopolitan bought it. First story I ever sold. Now, this is the issue it's in. As far as Cosmopolitan goes, this is an historic issue. Not because I'm in it, not because it has the first serial of Mona Simpson's important first novel, Anywhere But Here. Cosmo has this reputation for being kind of a sexy magazine. There's that period when either Walmart or Costco wouldn't put it at the front registers. Only one time have they ever had frontal nudity. Of course, it's the issue I'm in. My mother was so proud. And this, much to my astonishment, after the short story appeared in print, agents approached me, and they all wanted to know, did I have a novel? I didn't. So I gave up the immediate gratification of writing short stories and spent the next year before going to work writing a novel. And at the end of a year, by gosh, I had one. And the agent sold it instantly. Not because it's any good, because it's not. This was the 1980s, and if you set a book in New York City with young adults and had them snorting cocaine, it would sell. You know, Jay McInerney, Bret Easton Ellis, Tamma Janowitz, Chris Bohjalian, not. But I share this book with you, the single worst first novel ever published, bar none, because of the really interesting footnote on the back cover. Because I went right to work. I did not know a lot of novelists. But my editor at St. Martin's said, "Can you get a blurb?" I didn't say, "Isn't that your job?" Instead, ever the eager young writer, I said, of course. And I knew one writer. Not well. I had maybe been in the same room with him once, and it was probably this big. He was the creative director of the ad agency, worldwide. But he'd published 3 or 4 books. So I went to him, and Tara knows who this is. I went to him and said, would you please read my manuscript and perhaps blurb it? And he did. And he wrote this, and I'm just going to read you part of it. Chris Bohjalian's novel is witty, well-written, and fresh, blah, blah, a stylish thriller, complex, timely, looking forward to his next. Who wrote that? James Patterson. Who at the time needed to tell people who he was. James Patterson, author of Black Market.
And it paid off, because look at where you are now. Thank you so much. I think we're about to switch to our audience Q&A. So I'll just remind the audience, if you do have a question, please wait until one of the volunteers brings a microphone to you, but raise your hand up really high so everyone can see. Oh, I think we have one right here in the front middle.
Tell us about your character development. How do you, when you start off with a character, do you know what's going to happen in your book with that character?
Great. So just for the folks in the live stream, in case you couldn't hear, the question is about character development, and if you as a writer know what's going to happen to your character when you create them.
I never know what's going to happen in my books when I start, and I don't know what's going to happen to the characters. I begin with a very vague premise. The Poisonwood Bible meets and then there were none, which of course would become The Lioness. Or alcoholic flight attendant wakes up next to a dead body far from home. She's a blackout drunk. But that's all I know, a premise. I depend upon my characters to take me by the hand and lead me through the dark of the story. And as I write the book, I get to know them. Who are they married to? Are they married? What are their demons? What don't they tell people? What is the face they show the public versus the face they show their spouse, their children, or only the face that they see in the mirror? What happens to them is largely a product of cause and effect. If I put 9 people from Hollywood in the Serengeti, 9 people who know nothing about how to survive without guides and rangers, what will happen to them? If a woman wakes up next to a dead body in Dubai, what will the FBI's legal attaché do in Dubai? Does the FBI even have a legal attaché in Dubai, or is it in Abu Dhabi? These are all of the things that I discover when I'm writing a novel.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have another question? I think we have one right up here.
Hi. Do you ever get stuck when you're writing? And if you do, what do you do about that? If you know what I mean by stuck.
That's a good question, like writer's block.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you get stuck when writing? Do you ever get writer's block, and how do you work yourself through it?
When I get writer's block, I love to ask people, I'm sorry, what was your name? What's the first question? Thank you, Carrie. And what's your name?
Ellie.
Thank you, Allie. Former Vermonter. Thank you. When I have writer's block, it usually means I haven't done my homework. If the scene isn't working, it means I don't know enough about the characters and what they do, or what they would do. So, for example, when I was writing my novel, The Red Lotus, which is fundamentally from the perspective of a New York City ER doctor, when the book stalled, it was usually because I didn't know enough about the emergency room, or an ER doctor, or a private detective. So what would I do? I would visit an ER. I would call an ER doctor. I would interview a New York City detective. This is what gives a book its foundation. That's all of the, when you look at our houses, we see sheetrock. But behind the sheetrock are pipes and wires and load-bearing beams. And my research are the wires, the pipes, and the beams. You don't see all of it. You might not see any of it. But I needed both to propel the book forward and to understand that character. Now, a little research goes a long way. So when I was writing The Red Lotus about an ER doctor, among the things I learned that I'm not sure I put in the book, but they are so much fun. If you were to ask yourselves, what are the two most common reasons that a human being goes to an emergency room in New York City on the weekend, you would be wrong. Because these are the two most common things an ER doctor sees on the weekend. People who have tripped over their pets and people who have badly sliced their fingers slicing bagels.
Always bagels?
Bagels.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Oh, I see a hand over here on this side.
Hi, my name is Colleen.
Hi, Colleen.
And I actually was thinking you might have the other problem, that you have so many premises, so many ideas. How do you decide which one to pursue? What maybe stays as a short story and which one sees it all the way through?
Your questions are great. Ariel is clearly a wonderful mentor and teacher. Oh, I forgot to give you.
Oh, for the folks on the live stream, the question is, how do you decide which premises are short stories, which ones are novels, and maybe even which ones won't make it to the page at all?
I rarely write short stories. Rarely. I think I've written 4 in the last 20 years. It takes me 50 words to describe a sneeze. So the question is, which are those premises that will become novels, and which are the ones that won't? I will usually spend 2 or 3 weeks researching a book before I start writing to make sure the premise is viable. And I will, sometimes it's happened at least 5 times. Write anywhere between 100 pages and a finished book before discovering this isn't a good book. This isn't the book I should write. Bill Gates talks a lot about one of the secrets to being a successful entrepreneur is knowing when to cut bait. And sometimes I figure out at 50 pages or 100 pages, cut bait. Move on. This is not the right book. And in at least 3 cases, I've written an entire first draft before I realized, for one reason or another, this book is not salvageable It was a year of your life. It made you a better writer. You learned something. Let it go. And I have. And, I'm happiest when I don't waste a year of my life. When I waste 2 weeks or 2 months. But one of the things that my wife has said to me when I'm not responding well to criticism she's giving me to a manuscript, wouldn't you rather hear it from me than the New York Times? And she's right.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you again, Chris, so much for tonight. It has been amazing talking to you about the line.
Before I leave the dais, I just wanted to once again thank Ariel. You are fantastic. Great journalist, great mentor, great teacher, wonderful, wonderful writer. Rachel, thank you. Tara, thank you. Judy, Gary, thank you. Jessica, Annie, E. Shaver Booksellers. I had the best time today at E. Shaver. They've got 2 cats. Usually, if a bookstore is 1 cat, that's the win. Doubleheader for them. And oh my gosh, the nooks, the crannies, the warrens in that bookstore, it is a treasure. The Savannah Book Festival is among the best in the world. This is a great book city. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Savannah. Thank you for celebrating what words and reading and books can mean to the soul. All of you rock. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And Chris will be personalizing books purchased from E. Shaver. So please come get one of his awesome novels and come over and say hello. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.
We did it. Oh, yeah. I was like, I don't need that anymore.
You're the best.
Oh, thanks.
That's fantastic. My voice held up.